ground rules and things to note. This isn't structured necessarily as a debate, so we ask that you try your best not to interrupt each other. We do encourage you guys to respond to one another, but for the most part, try to let the other person finish. You can nod disapprovingly as much as you want, silently, but try to wait. And then we're probably going to interrupt you guys at some point if we're getting a lengthy answer. We don't mean to be rude, even if it comes off as rude. I've been trying to get better at how I interrupt people, but it still seems horrible every time I do. But we don't mean to be rude. We just got to keep things going. So anyways, thank you all for joining. I'm glad we've got a big panel this morning. This is our endorsement interview for Measure 26-228, which would reform our form of government and also our election system. Real quick, let's just do brief introductions, and by that I just mean name, profession, title, 10 words. We'll start with Paul.
So my name is Paul Gronke. I'm a professor of political science at Reed College, and I run the Elections and Voting Information Center.
Thank you.
Debbie Kitchen, InterWorks General Contractors. My husband and I own a residential and commercial remodeling business.
Becca Urlo, and I'm one of the 20 members of the Portland Charter Review Commission.
Kathleen Sadat, retired community activist.
Hi, David Knowles, member of the Charter Commission here in my personal capacity. I'm former Portland Planning Director, former Metro Councilor, and retired from doing planning and transportation consulting.
Good morning, Alyssa Pishka, President, Bridge Economic Development.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we're going to start with a little bit longer introduction, and I'm going to ask each campaign to take between 1 and 2 minutes to tell us why you're either supporting this measure or why you are opposing it, and we'll start with the Yes campaign.
Sure. Thanks for the opportunity. Before we kind of dive into how this is going to lead to a more effective, efficient, accountable, and representative form of government, I'm going to spend 30 seconds on process. So the Charter Commission has spent the last 18 months, 1,000 hours worth of conversation and research to help build this measure. It's really been a measure that's built for and by Portlanders. We've had 4,000 people respond to the survey, 26 community listening sessions, 87 formal Charter Commission meetings, 127 briefings and informational sessions. So again, this has been very well researched and well informed. In terms of why I'm personally supporting the measure, because we all know what the problem is, right? Right now, Portland is not working for any of us. We've had the same form of government for over 100 years, and it has led to inefficiency, unaccountability, and historically has not been representative of all Portlanders. Moving away from the commission form of government, which is what we currently have now, and creating a strong executive in the mayor who will work in partnership with the city administrator will mean that Portlanders have better access to city services, will have a long-term vision for the city, and the mayor will have full authority on ensuring, and accountable to voters, ensuring that Portlanders can access services effectively. The council will move to an expanded council, which means that we'll have one counselor for about 1 to every 50,000 Portlanders, which is both what the research recommends in terms of ratio, and coincidentally, it was the ratio we had back in 1913 when the commission form of government was first put together. And what that means is that Portlanders who haven't had a voice in City Hall will have more of an opportunity to have a voice, both in terms of lowering the barriers to make a choice to run for office, and also increasing the opportunity for them to have a connection to the person who is representing them. And increased opportunity, I think, in 2 ways. One, for the first time in the history of our city, we will have guaranteed geographic representation for Portlanders. The measure creates 4 distinct geographic districts, which is going to be drawn by an independent commission. Another way in which Portlanders can fully engage in helping ensure the success of implementation. And it also will have 3 city councilors per geographic district. Again, it gives Portlanders more opportunity, more avenues to both have a connection, either if it's a geographic, this is my neighbor, or ideological, right? It actually ensures that folks will have, again, more of an opportunity to elect a candidate of their choice and feel represented on the city council. And the last thing I would say is that this is our one shot, right? We've tried this a number of times. It has failed spectacularly on the ballot. And one of the things we learned many lessons from failed attempts in the past, is that Portlanders are not interested in concentrating the power in the mayor or in any one body. This measure really strikes a balance. It balances power. Essentially, there's checks and balances on kind of both forms of elected representation. And we're not going to get this chance again. And so that is the reason why we are urging a yes vote.
Thank you. All right, no campaign?
So Kathleen and I have a couple of things we want to say. We'll do it quickly. First is the number of things that we agree on with the Charter Commission. One, of course, is that the commission form of government needs to go. The second is the proposal for districts, which we think is essential in our current situation. The third is we can support ranked choice voting for single winners if the public wants to do that. Our strong preference is that people have a choice about that. Where we strongly disagree is the council structure of 4 districts and 3 members each. We are particularly concerned about the complicated and confusing voting scheme, which you have tackled in your work in the last couple of days, and we want to drill into that a little more. And we think the mayor, as currently defined in the charter proposal, is too weak. We also agree that inclusivity is really important, and but there are consequences to the way that's been carried out in this proposal.
What do you mean by that?
Let Kathleen, if you don't mind.
Excuse me.
Then we'll be.
When I read the preferred outcomes for the commission, what I saw was a great focus on participation in democracy and inclusiveness, and I agree with that, support it, been working on it all my life. At the same time, there is not much that addresses the functions of government and where the complaints are and how one resolves those problems that exist in the interaction between government and the people who are governed. And I find that is a problem for me. I want to see more of that design for improved government regardless. If we send everyone into a room where it's not functional, it's no more functional, just having more people there. So that's one of the big things for me. The other is that everything is packed into one ballot measure. And that really, to me, silences some voices. It means that you don't get to choose between ranked order voting number 1 and number 2. It means that you cannot have a thought about whether or not you have 3 representatives from a district, or 2, or 1. There are choices that are limited by the way the ballot measure itself is constructed.
Thanks. David, can we loop back to you? We also agree that inclusivity is important, but consequences as to how that's been carried out.
Well, I think what, part of Kathleen and my point is that inclusivity is absolutely essential, but so is functionality. And what is missing, and was missing from the outset of the Commission's work, is this combined focus on both inclusivity and function. The Commission's outcomes, 6 outcomes, all related to adding voices to city government and creating more diversity. None of them really addresses the function of government. The need for a city administrator, the need for good administration, none of that is addressed in any of those outcomes. And so that's sort of what was missing from the Commission's work at the outset. And that's the kind of concern that I think we share for sure, is just that lack of functionality and focus on functionality.
If I may, inclusivity should be a foundation for a functional government. There should be no question about that.
Can the No campaign further explain what exactly is not fully fleshed out for you guys as far as functionality of what this proposal would do?
Well, I guess I would say the function of the executive is not strong enough. So the focus of the recommendation is really on a bifurcated sort of reporting structure between the council and the city administrator. So if you look in their materials, what this shows is a reporting structure that has the city administrator in a dual reporting structure. I mean, I don't think there's any organization where you have the board of directors in charge of both the CEO and the staff. It doesn't make much sense. So we're really concerned about just where the lines of authority go. The mayor is only going to have the opportunity to select a city administrator subject to council confirmation, and the council can fire the city administrator. So that is not, in our minds, a combination that makes sense if you want to have a place where you could really pinpoint accountability.
So
Can I clarify? Oh, sorry.
Sure, no, go
Just a
ahead.
couple of things. I mean, just to be abundantly clear, the mayor will supervise the city administrator. That day-to-day supervision will happen by one individual. They are not supervised by the city council.
But
The
Becca,
city council's-
the lines here show something different.
That is for how that person is selected. So David is right that the city administrator will be chosen by the mayor but must be confirmed by a simple majority of council. And that again goes back to what we heard repeatedly from everyone who engaged in this process.
It's also a standard mechanism.
Standard mechanism.
I mean,
They
the
wanted-
suggestion, David, would be was that the council have no voice over the city administrator. That surely is not accountability. You'd want the legislature to have some power over that administrator.
Right, it is a very common structure, and we see it at the state level where department directors are confirmed by the legislature, although they are appointed and supervised by the governor. So this is a very common structure that happens in cities across the country. It's not an unusual form.
Something I've heard repeatedly, and it sounds like is one of the main gripes of the No campaign, is that we have never combined all of these, tenants into one proposal. So how on earth can we predict how this is going to work, and that something super wacky isn't going to happen with multi-member districts and ranked choice voting? How do you assuage those fears of voters, saying, what if something just like so strange happens and it's not predictable at this point?
I think there is evidence that, the elements that we have, the multi-member districts, proportional representation does happen in many cities and local governments around the world, and it has been shown to be very effective at increasing representation, at decision-making, and at functionality. There's concerns, they've expressed concerns about the size of the council, and again, Becca already addressed the representation of 1 per 50,000 population. That is also, we have many other cities that have similar sizes. That's kind of in the mid-range. It's not extreme on one end or the other.
What U.S. city is the one that you guys have been citing that has multi-member? It's just one huge district, right, with ranked choice voting?
For
Massachusetts?
In Cambridge,
Yes,
Massachusetts.
okay.
Yeah.
The impact and first, the voter experience is the same, right? In terms of what they will actually experience on the ballot, they get to rank their candidates in order of preference, and the outcomes are the same, meaning that multi-members will be elected that better represent the constituency, right? There's nothing in this measure that is unique, right? Perhaps the combination is unique, but there's nothing in this measure that's unique. All components have a long history and have been tested, right? And at the end of the day, I mean, we had hours-long conversation about how we actually didn't want a cookie-cutter version off the shelf, right? We didn't want to look at a city and say, okay, that meets our needs, because Portland is unique. So we wanted to make sure that we were taking the very best to address our unique needs here in Portland.
What U.S. city has more than one regional voting district or geographic voting district and also uses ranked choice voting?
More than
There's-
one geographic district?
Yes.
As opposed to one at-large district. I mean, one district.
And multi-member too, is
Yes,
that what you're asking?
multi-member,
Okay,
yes.
because lots of cities have districts and ranked choice voting,
Sure,
but
sure,
not the
but
multi-member.
multi-member.
Yeah, it isn't in the US. We've looked at models that are in other countries, and that's Australia, New Zealand, Ireland, Scotland. So those models of multi-member districts with ranked choice voting are at local city levels.
So I guess one thing that's not making sense to me is that, the Yes campaign has said, we don't want a cookie cutter model. We want something that is tailored to Portland. But you're also saying these things have been proven to work overseas.
Right.
There seems to be a weird rub there of we don't want something that's happened in other cities, but at the same time, we know it works because it's happened in other cities.
Well, those are, they're not mutually exclusive. We haven't said we don't want something that has never happened anywhere. We've said that there is evidence that this works, but it was tailored. The 4 districts and the 3-member districts were tailored to Portland. And that's where we had simulation analysis of residents in the city, and we were looking at underrepresented groups, communities of color, renters, other groups that have not been represented on city council, low income. So we did population analysis on where voters are, and our history of gentrification and resident patterns has led to a situation where we don't have neighborhoods or districts that are concentrated by communities of color. So, so there's no majority district where communities of color could have be able to choose a representative of their choice in a winner-takes-all format. So we looked at single-person districts, we looked at 9 districts, 12 districts, 7 districts. We analyzed all these things about a year ago was when we went deep into that work. And we looked at 4 districts, 5 districts, 2-member, 3-member, 4-member, 5-member. And so it was an exercise in trying to keep a city council that was manageable. And we had been told by experts that a good number was 9 to 13 in terms of manageability of a council. So that was in my mind from those experts. And then, having, whether we had 5-member districts or 5 districts, getting to 25 was not acceptable to many of us. We didn't think it would.
Yeah. So
this was that, so it was based on analysis of Portland. It wasn't that we said, oh, here's a city that has 3, or here's a city that has 4, members per district. It was based on this simulation work that we looked at and studied and talked about extensively.
Mm-hmm. So I know a lot of the goals are about equal representation or better representation for voices that have historically been left out of this process. We look at our current council and we have 3 people of color, we have a gay man, we have 2 women, we have a renter. Is that not proof that we're doing okay on representation as far as elected officials?
But you can't look at one council in absence of looking at 100 years of councils, right? Since 1995, 75% of those folks who've served on city council have been white men. We've only elected 9 women ever. We've only elected 5 people of color ever. So while this council is representative, there is no structural guarantee that folks can elect a candidate of their choice.
But you don't think part of the reason that we have so many people, like you think this is an aberration that we have so many people of color on council currently. You don't think that has anything to do with just we've become a more modern society where people do have more access? I
think a lot of it had to do with the small donor program, right? That was a barrier that was removed in terms of folks being able to run for office. We're removing another barrier. One of the things about our at-large districts is it's so expensive. You have to communicate with so many voters, and even though the small donor program does help, and again removes barriers for diverse candidates, having districts where you have to communicate with fewer voters makes it less expensive and makes it more able for you to connect one-on-one on the door or in community, and so it removes another barrier.
Can I just, for your side, does your proposal make the mayor any stronger than he is today?
Yes.
And in what way?
The mayor is an executive. They are the chief executive. They're basically the CEO of the city, right? And the city administrator is the COO. It's not unlike the configuration that Metro or Multnomah County has. They are fundamentally responsible and have full authority of all of the functions and operations of the city, right? They are responsible for day-to-day operations. They also are responsible for implementing policy. They are the full authority in terms of day-to-day what happens at the city.
I don't want to get personal. I'm sorry, I'm going to move on. I don't want to get personal, but I want to ask you a question. I've never met you before. I've heard a lot of good things about you. I had breakfast with someone last week who was very surprised at your position. and said you've been opposed to charter reform. I'm just going to tell you what they passed on to me. That you've been concerned with charter reform, that you've been on the fence, that you find yourself in a pickle, that you've got political ambitions,
Oh my
and as a
goodness.
consequence, that's why you're supporting it.
No.
Are you gonna run
That
for-
couldn't be further from the
Well,
truth.
that's great. I'm glad you discussed that. Can you tell me?
I mean,
do you have
the
political-
reason I joined the Charter Commission was because I was in support of charter reform. And I originally joined the Charter Commission because I was concerned about the form of government. But as I went through the process and our 80 plus meetings, I learned a lot from Portlanders about how disenfranchised people felt, how they felt they didn't have choices. You know, that hasn't been my experience that much. I mean, sometimes I'm picking the lesser of two evils in a race,
So
but you know.
I'm happy to put that rumor to
Yeah,
bed. Do you
yeah.
have political aspirations? Is it your plan to run for office?
I don't have any plans at this point. I would be, you know, I might be interested at some point. I participated in the Emerge program in 2021,
Yep.
which, you know, is for women, Democratic women who want to run for office. And that was a great experience. I developed, you know, Alyssa's also a graduate of that program. so I have been interested, I mean, you know, in that exercise. We had to pick what office we wanted to run for in order to do all our exercises in the class, and I did pick city council. But that's not what's driving this. What's driving this has been wanting to change the form of government initially for me, and then seeing the benefit of better representation, better decision making, balancing the power between the mayor and the city council. All of those have become issues that I've learned a lot more about and have, you know, I'm fully in support of this.
Well, just one other question, if I might. So we've spoken to a number of political consultants who run campaigns and who basically make a living convincing all of us in this room that just with a few bucks I could make you mayor. And all of them, and you know, they all tend to fall left or right, they all tend to support either Republican or conservative candidate. And on all sides of the spectrum, virtually everyone has said to me, and I think many people here, with this multi-member district, I'll be able to get anybody elected, no matter how far left or how far right. Now that may in fact be a good thing, right? You want a diversity of voices. Or is it a bad thing?
I don't think it's true.
100%
You know, I
it's
think,
not true.
Yes.
Well, I mean,
so,
all I'm just telling you is the industry of people who get people elected in the state say that that is true. So,
Okay.
And
we
have
take-
any of them had experience running a campaign in a multi-member district?
Because
I
it's
don't
never
know.
happened.
I don't know.
Well, can I just, you know, the number of votes.
You know, like when.
Yeah, the number of votes
I
you would
want
have to get.
states about vote by mail, and it's going to be a disaster, and then the vote by mail comes in. Oh, that's wonderful. These consultants adapt, campaigners adapt, organizations adapt. I think they're going to be able to adapt to this fine. Can they get anyone elected? No.
No.
I-
Well, it's only
Well,
20,
that
it's
doesn't
only
work.
25%.
The citizens,
But
the citizens
let me just
activist
share with-
organizations in Portland are very active,
Yeah.
and they'll be involved. So no, I don't. I don't know who you
there's-
spoke to.
Yeah, I think there's also something that we need to keep in mind. You know, there are proposals for 7 districts, single-member districts, or 9 single-member districts as an alternative. If you have 4 districts, the number of voters that you have to get approval from are 22,500, basically, taking the number of votes that were in the Portland mayoral race in 2020. So if you take that number, to get 25%, you need to get about 22,500 votes. That's what you need to win. If you have more districts, like say 7 districts, the number of votes you need to get are 25,500 or 26,000. So that difference is not that extreme. And even though one is 25% of a much bigger district, the other is 50% of much smaller districts. So if you do the math, there's not that much
yeah,
difference.
I mean, what I'm hearing is that the aggregate numbers aren't the issue. It's the fact that 3 individuals from one geographic area get elected, and that's what leads to the ability to.
So
But then each need
the
that
evidence is that the
threshold.
barrier to entry from multi-member districts is lower. You have more first-time candidates, you have more female candidates, you have more candidates of color. So the barriers to entry are lower. Yes, that's a good thing. Is there a campaign industry out there that will work with those Are there organizations, other political organizations? Absolutely. So I'm not sure that's a problem that we're going to have high-quality candidates running in these districts.
One thing I've thought about is, let's take the candidates we had in the primary for city council positions 2 and 3. So in 2, we've got Dan Ryan, AJ McCreary, Sandeep Bali, those were the top 3. Position 3, we've got Vadim, Renee, and Hardesty. In this system, if those had still been the strongest candidates, which I think there's a very strong argument that those would have been, all 6 of those people would be on council. I mean, is that the kind of representation that you guys are searching for? Because personally, that makes me a little nervous.
You just can't make that statement. Because you have to make a choice in that system on viability, because you know only one person is going to win. So you have to vote. So in the Vadim, Renee, Joanne, yeah, that one, the numbers are close enough that I think you could potentially make an argument that all 3 of those will come in. And frankly, I don't think that would have been a bad outcome if we thought that the second choices, right? Remember, we got to think about who the second choice was. With Ryan, there would have been second choices in there. People would not have had to flow in because of viability. It's a completely different way for the voters to think about it. I don't have to just choose my least worst outcome. I don't have to worry about, well, if I vote for my second choice or my third choice, I'm going to be wasting that vote. That logic doesn't apply anymore.
Right, but that's not what I'm saying. I mean, I'm saying if those 3 had still run, Sandeep, AJ, and Dan, and yeah, you get to vote for all 3. Let's say someone said Dan, AJ, Sandeep. Yeah, their vote doesn't get wasted, but it's still going to get recycled, and all 3 of those could have been elected.
I don't know enough about the Ryan race to know who I think the second or third preferences would have been for Ryan, for the Ryan voters, if they would have been facing that situation where they could spread out their votes, right? So we're looking at a first past the post where the whole logic for the voter is, I'd like to vote for the one I like best, but I have to worry about wasting my vote. That just doesn't apply to the voter.
Isn't the flip side of that you can end up with some monumentally unqualified candidates getting elected? I mean, we sit here every 2 years and see a lot of candidates who'd like to run for city council, and with all due respect, most of them are vastly underqualified for the job. Why is that going to suddenly change overnight?
I think by having the districts and not having it at large, I think you're going to attract different candidates that would be interested in working in a more collaborative environment, that don't want to run city bureaus, that are interested in, they've worked with groups before, boards and things, and they have that experience of working with a group.
Can I stop you just for a second?
Yeah.
Why would it be a more collaborative environment if you have 3 people in a single district that voters have segmented? It's going to be because
but
those
that's
people
not the
don't
logic again, Nigel. The logic, if you're running, take the Alaska example. Sarah Palin made a massive mistake by saying, vote for me. So Alaska had ranked choice voting. Vote for me, don't vote for anyone else. She lost with that strategy. So the winning strategy in a multi-member district in the ranked choice voting is not to run against your opponents, because you might want to be the second light. You might want to be the third light. So collaboration is embedded into the strategic structure.
I just don't believe that, because
but that's what the case studies, that's exactly right, and that's what the research shows. If you look at all of the different jurisdictions who have ranked choice voting, and as someone who's been involved in campaigns for 25 years, the campaigns are going to look and feel different. You cannot run against your opponent. You have to essentially lift yourself up. So rather than what we have now, which is the only thing you learn about a candidate is how ruthless or scandalous they are, you actually have to appeal to the majority of voters in order to pass the threshold. And so campaigns are going to look and feel different, and they do. I mean, if you look at the research, they do.
Mathematically, you only have to get 25%, so you don't have to appeal to majority of voters.
You have to appeal to enough voters to get elected.
25%?
Right? You can't isolate.
So that's a fringe right now. That's
well, it's not even.
It is not a fringe. 22,000 Portlanders is not a fringe.
Sure,
I mean, that's just.
25% is a fringe candidate. Look at
not in a district.
So
I mean,
if we have 7 districts and you elect somebody with 25,000, that's not a fringe. But if you have a district that's a quarter of the city and you elect them with 22,000, that is a fringe. How does that work?
Why would we
I don't understand.
Why would we want to do 7 districts?
Pick a number. What number do you want to pick?
Let's make this one way. Let's make this
But let me
different.
say,
Paul?
you could take that. It's very risky.
Okay.
It's a much smarter strategy to appeal more broadly because you want to be the second or third. Look at the gubernatorial race right now. Look what's going on. We have spoiler candidates, and people have to say, which is my least worst candidate? This system doesn't work that way. Every incentive for candidates is to appeal broadly, to build coalitions.
Can you straighten us out on the belief that surveys showed that Portlanders didn't want to have this in one
Oh, sure.
vote, but you chose two?
Yeah, sure. A couple of things. One is I think you're referencing the poll that the PBA helped pay for, the one that said
Probably.
that, right? So if you look at the way they asked that question, it's essentially asking, do you want one cookie or three, right? Of course, Portlanders are going to say three, but they did it out of context. They didn't say, would you like to have this measure with these policies combined and vote on this one measure, or would you like to vote on these three components separately? So again, the way the question was worded led to the outcome that it resulted in. The one thing I will say, just in terms of consideration of why we bundled them, the policies, the components of the policy aren't just complementary or related, they're interdependent. They work together, and in fact, we had conversations with the attorneys about how if we did separate them out, because it was a very deliberative process, we had hours worth of conversation about if they should be separate, that if we separated them out, we'd actually have to include trigger language, right? So for example, if we separated out the mayor council, the city administrator, and separated that out from multi-member districts, we would have to have trigger language in one of the measures to say if this one fails, so does this one. Because we do not want the policy outcome of 12 members of the city council managing bureaus. That is, I mean, talk about dysfunction. I will also say the mayor council is the least popular component of the ballot measure, right? And so if we separated them out into three different ones, that's a likely outcome, that the mayor council loses and then we get a 12-member expanded council, more representative.
Based on your own surveys, your own polling?
There's no your own polling. We've had access to at least 4 or 5 different polls. We had access to 2 polls before we made our decision at our 78th meeting, right? And all of those folks, I mean, you can look at the pollsters, they're reputable. You can talk to your political consultant firms, they're the exact same polling firms that have been polling on ballot measures for 20 years. We did not, I'll speak for myself, I did not, having had a long history in campaigns and elections and ballot measures, want to forward something to the ballot that Portlanders did not want. And they wanted these 3 components of the policy, and they wanted them together.
And I also think that, part of that decision wasn't just polling. It was also what we heard in all our listening sessions and in conversations with people. There were so many comments related to districts, right? People can understand it. Yeah.
So you've made it's very apparent why this switch would lead to more inclusivity. At the risk of me being done, explain why it would be more collaborative. And I guess I'm getting back to it. I mean, just take a look at the current city council. Why are they not more collaborative?
I can't answer that question, but
if you can't analyze it, it's hard to figure out what the fix is.
They run bureau. There's no incentive for them to work across the bureau because they're all running their own bureaus and their own budgets.
But you're certainly aware, Paul, you're almost as old as I am, that there have been administrations that have been very, very collaborative because they had a mayor who knew how to get to 3. I'm not suggesting we keep the form of government.
Under Mayor Katz, Sam Adams wrangling, there was a period of time when the economy was doing well. We did well during that period.
So I guess I'm getting to, I understand why your proposal leads to more inclusion and diversity. Why does it necessarily need to more collaboration? I realize that you no longer have...
You got to get to 7. They have to get to 7 to pass.
It goes back to in the inherent benefits.
They're not siloed, right? They're a legislature. Because if they want to do something, they got to get to 7.
Mm-hmm. I would also say
this one, you just run your bureau. You want to plant some trees, you fight with this other bureau. Got to be better than that, right?
The other thing I would add is just kind of going back to changing the way in which we're electing people leads to more collaboration from the jump. Because you don't have
collaboration from the jump.
Sorry, from the beginning.
Oh, jump.
Yeah. Because ranked choice voting, and again, the research is extensive, leads to more civil discourse in campaigns. So you don't have candidates attacking each other, and so therefore, when they are elected to office, they're not angry with each other, right? They're not holding on to these resentments where they can't build coalition and work together on issues that they both care about.
So you think this is going to see the end of negative campaigning?
This is not a measure that's going to solve all the world's problems, but what it is going to do is lead to a more effective, efficient, functional, and representative form of government.
But I'm sorry, I still don't get this, because what we're talking about is inclusivity, and that's going to include a lot of voices, including voices that have no representation on the current council, the far right or the center right. So why would somebody who's a far-right candidate from Lentz or from Cully all of a sudden want to cooperate with a hardcore lefty from inner southeast Portland? They're both going to get 25% of the vote. So what makes them more collaborative?
Well, first of all, I would push back on the extremist argument. We might very well get more moderate and conservative representation on city council, right? At the end of the day, in order to pass policy, you got to get to 7. So there might be 1 or 2 lone voices out there who don't agree with the shared policy. You still got to get to 7. You don't have to get to 100%, right, in order to forward policy.
Kathleen?
Go ahead.
You're the original gangster in this room, and for those...
I don't know what that means, but okay.
But it's a compliment, and for those who aren't as old as you and I, you know, you have been a warrior for civil rights, one of the leading lights in this city for the past 40 years. You've screamed at me, we've had issues, but you've been a person for whom I've had enormous respect, and I'm surprised to see you on that side of the table. Your entire life has been dedicated to civil rights and inclusivity. And yet you don't think this is going to get us there?
I have no problem with the inclusivity part. I have no problem with that. Mm-hmm. As I understood the task, it was to change the charter so that it made the city government more functional. And that's the piece that's missing for me. It's not the I don't have a problem with that. I have a problem with where's the rest of it. I have 2 major problems. Where's the rest of it, and why is all of this put in one place?
You mean one vote?
1 ballot measure. It's a very complicated thing. I think it, for many voters, will obfuscate that second type of rank-ordered voting, which in my mind is highly questionable as a piece. And I've looked at it. I'm old, but I still think I retain some ability to understand some things. I find it very complicated.
Can I just put, I'm so curious about this argument around functionality, right? There are absolute components of this measure that lead to increased functionality. Moving away from a commission form of government and to a city administrator, like check, right? It's so interesting to me that we're talking about how this measure does not increase functionality, because that's just not true. The other thing I will just say, and this
can I finish?
Sure. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
All right. And you bring up a point that the city manager lays a foundation for improved functionality. But there's a lot of other stuff that goes on in the city that has to do with this, how the city manages its business, including having things spread across the city that might be connected, including having processes that, you know. So I'm not sure what you say, but it doesn't feel like any of that was addressed for me. Those are other elements of functionality. You don't just put this guy in place with a sort of, for me, not well enough defined definition of his role, and then say, okay, have at it, and then we got to do this. I think we do more than one thing, but I think we do it differently.
You, at the top of this, basically said, you're quoting Eminem, this is our one shot.
I love that you know that reference.
But we heard on Monday it's not our one shot.
Right.
You know, now again, you could say, you know, their politicians don't believe what they say, but they're claiming within 6 months there will be a ballot measure that sounds to me like it more reflects the interest in them. So are they lying, or do you want to correct your statement that this is the one shot the city has?
This is the one shot that the city has for a couple of reasons. One is, and you all report on this all the time, it's difficult for this current city council to count to 3 on anything hard. So that's the first hurdle to clear, right?
If you were told that they had 3 votes on this,
Well, second, so that's the first hurdle that they have to clear. The second hurdle they have to clear is voter approval. And again, in my more than 2 decades worth of campaign experience, I've never seen, ever, voters say yes to something that they just said no to. That has, in their minds, distinctions without a difference, right? I mean, I think there are big differences between what this ballot measure does and Commissioner Mapp's proposal, but it's just not going to happen. Voters aren't going to say yes to something. And by the way, just as an aside, Commissioner Mapp's is proposing that this be on a primary ballot, right? And historically, we have seen that is a really, really small slice of the electorate who get to make that choice, right? And so that in and of it, that's what we're trying to address with this ballot measure, right? And so that...
So you're not disputing his commitment to putting it on the ballot, you just don't think it would pass?
I don't think it'll get there, and if by miracle, if it gets there, it will not pass.
Who do you think on council would be the 3 to say no?
To say no to him?
What?
Yeah.
I don't
No,
understand
I mean,
why
I
the
think-
obligation is not on the part
Can
of
I
someone
say-
who's floating a proposal and say, you know what, vote no because I got a better idea. You know, vote
But
yes.
that's not what I'm asking.
I
There's
understand,
a
but
place
who are
for
the
that.
three
But
who say yes?
that's not.
I'm sorry.
I'm just not
Well,
what
I
I'm
mean, that's
asking
the
right now.
obligation. You say you got the, you say don't.
That's actually pretty easy, Paul.
Is it?
Ted, Dan, Mingus,
Will they?
3.
Right.
Where's the commitment?
Yeah.
Have we
I have
seen
to
that
say,
commitment?
I think
Yeah.
they should
Put
all
down
say...
$5 on the table right now, Paul.
I
Paul,
need
would
to
you
say
want Ted
something.
Wheeler to come out in support of anything that you're in favor of right now? Do you think that's a campaign when
I think the voters should be deciding
to
on the
imagine that Ted
alternatives that
Wheeler
are
is going to
in
go
front
to a
of
press
them.
conference
Not
supporting-
following a sort of classic political strategy here, which is, you know what? Don't vote for this. I'm going to give you something better. I mean, it feels to me like the Republic. Let's vote against ACA because we have a beautiful alternative that will show you after this is the alternative that's in front of us. It's a big improvement on what we have now. That's what I encourage the voters to look at what is in front of them, not something that's being floated that we don't know is going to be there.
Can I just say
not
something?
surprisingly, we don't agree it's a better alternative. We agree, we think there are substantial problems with this. And it begins with the fact that everything they talked about, all the benefits, are based on research. It's a completely academic exercise. There's no real world experience about how this combination of multi-member districts, 4 districts, and this version of single transferable vote would work. There's no real world documentation.
I
So
need to
when
push
they
back
talk
on that.
about,
I know you do, but I want to follow up on that.
okay,
So let's assume for a moment that Mingus Mapps and Ted Wheeler and Dan Ryan are as incompetent as it's been suggested that they are, and that they do not manage to get a proposal on the ballot in May. Is the city better off with its current form of government or with this proposal?
my personal answer to that, and I'm not going to answer for these two, is that we would be better off because then if the city council can put it on the ballot, there's going to be a city initiative.
No, I'm asking if the world didn't change at all.
Didn't change at all.
If we just continued in our current state, are we better off than if this passed?
In my opinion, yes. And the reason is that we have a mayor that has more power than under the Charter Commission proposal, in my opinion.
So you disagree with their opinion that this makes for a stronger mayor?
I do disagree because the mayor's been kicked off the council. The mayor does not have a veto power as in a strong mayor system. And the mayor does not have complete control over the hiring and firing of the city administrator. So I think those are substantial impediments to a strong executive.
Can I just say, the mayor not being a member of council is included in the definition of a strong mayor, right? And in terms of the mayoral veto, again, we considered that for months. And we landed on it for a couple of reasons.
Did your committee think that a weak mayor was a problem? I mean, you may not have. I'm just wondering, if you identified at the beginning the problems with the existing city council, did you say
Yes.
mayor's a problem?
Yes,
So we
and
want to have a strong
one of the
mayor?
things we talked about was that the mayor is often blamed for all the things that don't happen, but they have very little power in our current system. So this gives them a lot more power, but we were trying to balance the power of the mayor with the power of the city council. So that
And we've
was a
ended up
concern.
with a mishmash of a system. But listen, I want to get to the biggest fundamental problem with this proposal, and it's this single transferable vote, for which there is no experience everywhere. So I don't know if you've looked at the charter text. It's 300 words. It's very, very technical. It's very hard to understand. The average voter certainly couldn't look at the law and find out how their vote gets counted. I think that's a problem. The other thing is that because there's no experience with this, the stories around how you get elected shift. So you say it's 25%, but I looked at the Minnesota Public Radio video again after the Oregonian interview. You guys probably looked at it, the one with all the little, you know, post-it notes being cut up and redistributed and stuff. And that shows that one of the scenarios is the third person can get elected without even reaching that threshold of 25%. So that's not the threshold.
So let me just say two things.
So let me finish, okay? Because you know you got all this great academic stuff. Their own website says that it's 33%. So is it 33% or 25%? I don't think that the yes side can even explain
so David
how this works.
Times there's only academic studies of single transferable vote. That is not correct, right? There are systems that have multi-member districts and single transferable votes. So that's not just an academic.
Is there a typo on the website?
I'm sorry?
Is there a typo on the website?
It's an Instagram post.
I don't know.
It says about a
September
third.
18th.
About a third is what I'm assuming what you're referencing.
You're right. It says about a third,
That's
which
33.
last time I checked is 33%, not 25%. So
The second thing is,
the point-
this is
moving all over the place.
Let him finish, please, Paul.
So, you know, just to conclude, this is moving all over the place. Even the yes side can't tell us for sure what it takes to get elected.
So the second thing I want to see is if you look at the language in the Oregon Revised Statutes for vote by mail, which I looked at, it goes on for pages. Now, vote by mail is pretty simple, but the language that describes it is pretty complicated. So David points to this language and says, look, this is long, complicated. Yeah, when we move away from simply first past the post to a somewhat more complicated way of summarizing votes, that implementation language gets complicated issue. For the voters, it is very straightforward. You rank order your choice, that's it.
Yes, but so we've gamed this out this week in the paper. I would agree that for the voter, the experience of marking your ballot is a fairly simple process. 1, 2, 3. I think anybody can manage that. But the transparency around how it works, once they've done it, it is a little bit like trusting the auto mechanic that the car is working. It is a really complicated. I spent a long time watching that NPR video. I had to watch it multiple times, and honestly, I still don't get it, and I'm just annoyed by it.
But the larger...
It's not that I don't understand it. I do understand it. I'm not pretending to be stupid for the sake of argument. It's just really, really annoying and almost impossible to comprehend how it is that someone won.
I don't think it's impossible, but it is more complicated. It is true. But there are many experts, right? And it is transparent, right? It's not...
No, I understand.
But yes, it's a bit more complicated.
But here's why that matters, and I want to actually ask you a question rather than just filibustering it. The question is there not a concern this is going to decrease voter trust in the system, that the person who they voted for actually, like, that the system wasn't being gamed by a machine?
No, I mean, where these systems are in place, no, there's no evidence of that.
Paul,
voters like the system, they enjoy it.
I always pronounce his last name wrong. Rob Nasi?
Nose.
Yeah, it's not rough. Yeah, it's disappointing.
Did you see the interview with him? So, I mean, you guys know who he is. You know what his liberal credentials are. And he said, I'm worried this is going to undermine confidence in the voting system. And he could be wrong, but it would seem to me you at least need to consider the possibility that he's right. And that would be completely at odds with your goals, which is to create some level of transparency and trust in democracy. And yet here you have a guy who ought to be with you who's saying, I think this is going to undermine trust in democracy. So I'm sure you're saying he's wrong, but isn't it possible that to a certain percentage of the voting populace he's absolutely right, and that your pursuit of the great is going to be an enemy of the good?
I don't believe so for a number of reasons. The reason, I mean, one of our desired outcomes was increasing participation in democracy. And when we looked at both the 43 jurisdictions who have ranked choice voting and a handful of jurisdictions who in the US that have some form of proportional ranked choice voting, what we saw is that it increases, not only removes barriers for candidates in terms of their ability to run, but also increases participatory democracy. Folks actually, if you look at both, they like the outcomes better, right? They're getting folks who are better represent them, but they actually like the experience of voting, right? Like Paul said, the voter experience is really straightforward, right? They get to fill out their ballot and rank them in order of preference.
So Washington has ranked choice voting now, right? The state of Washington?
The state
single winners.
Right. No, I know, it's not this, but they have ranked choice voting. I didn't know their voting turnout has gone up. You're saying the voting turnout has gone up because they've moved?
I'm saying that voters self-report that they like the experience of voting more than the first past the post. That they don't feel into this forced choice of, as Debbie said, choosing between the lesser of two evils. That they actually get to express a preference and feel that their voice is heard not just on their ballot, but then in the outcome. Because they actually are folks, small business folks, first-time candidates, folks of color, more women, that they feel better represented as an outcome. So it's both process and outcome.
So why did the committee choose this variant of ranked choice voting? And could you tell us again where it's currently being used in the U.S.? The exact system that
For the
you've
districting
chosen?
system, we chose it because it results in a proportional representation system, which is the most used in the democratic world.
But
right?
where is this particular system being used currently in the U.S.?
There are jurisdictions, including Cambridge, Massachusetts, East Point, Michigan, Palm Desert is just about to have their first.
What was the place in Michigan?
East Point. So East Point, Michigan, that's
how big a city is that?
I'm talking about the voter experience and the outcome that they see on the
We're a
ballot.
city of 700,000
But can I just
people.
say,
It's
I do want to.
How big a city is it?
I don't know, but I will tell you this. Both East Point, Michigan and Palm Desert, the reason they moved to proportional ranked choice voting was the result of a voting rights lawsuit, right? In order for them to address the fact that their cities has historically excluded and not represented folks in their community, they decided we're going to move to this system because we don't want to be violating the Voting Rights Act. I mean, that in and of itself is...
But Becca, come on, are we violating the Voter Rights Act in this
No,
city?
but what I'm telling you is that those, if folks are looking to move to a different system...
Let me cut to the chase. Why didn't you pick a system that is more... There are a lot of ranked choice voting systems that are being used by larger jurisdictions. Why not pick one of them?
Because it didn't, combined with multi-member districts and proportional ranked choice voting, it actually leads to the outcomes that we set out from the beginning. We spent 6 months figuring out what Portlanders wanted aspirationally and what they needed. They wanted efficiency, functionality, and more representation. Proportional representation, what leads to everyone has a fair chance to be represented. And that's what this system does.
Pardon my ignorance, have you determined whether the city commissioners would be full-time or part-time?
They're full-time.
And have you established the salary?
One of the pieces of this measure creates an independent salary commission made up of HR professionals. Right now, the city council sets their own salary, right? So
there's no prohibition against any members of the commission running for office, right?
That would be a First Amendment violation. There's no prohibition for anybody running for office as long as you're qualified.
And do you expect that some of the members of the commission will?
I cannot answer for anyone but myself.
Okay.
No, thank you.
So could I?
I can't believe you won't want to meet us again.
I'm sure I will meet you. I have never
Let's
had
give
any
a-
desire
let's
to
give a
be
chance,
elected.
please.
I'd like to touch on this issue of efficiency that has come up and back to functionality. I agree with David. I think this proposed charter amendment is going to be more damaging than the existing system. That's why I'm advocating for no. And what we're not talking about is what we're getting with multi-member representation versus single-member representation. And so nowhere in this conversation when we talked about inclusivity, which I agree is critical, nowhere in devising this system was it, how do we help improve addressing homelessness? How do we address crime? How do we help move our city forward? That has never been discussed in any of this today in terms of a vision for amending our charter. And I believe with the multi-member districts, it's going to make us even harder. It will be even harder to get to that because there's no accountability. You elect 3 people in your district. Who do you go to when you have an issue? Who do you know is going to resolve your issue? No one. But if we have single member representation, just as Rob Nose was saying in that interview, I know who's working and I know who's not working. We are setting up a system where no one's held accountable, which is completely dysfunctional, and that's not addressing the functional issues. So I think we need to be thinking about that just as much as we're talking about the nuances of this very complex and confusing voting system.
Can we talk about single member districts?
That's simply not true.
One second, Paul.
Okay, go ahead.
I want to talk about single member districts. We spent months in this conversation, and I want to address two things you said. One, in terms of who's working for me. In single member districts, that person is going to work for some people, maybe, but they're not going to represent, and in fact, as Debbie mentioned, our city, the demographics, we are not set up to where single member districts accomplish inclusivity. So that in of itself is a non-starter. Second, and Sightline just had some research, you talk about addressing homelessness. Single member districts lead to, moving from the system we have now to single member districts, lead to a decrease in investments in affordable housing and transportation. So single member districts actually increase.
So that, I just have to say, I used to run the permit system for the city of Portland. I know a lot about how housing gets done here. I'll tell you what hurts housing production. It's a screwed up, dysfunctional permit system, which you solve by having a functional government. It doesn't have anything to do with the configuration of the district, particularly in Oregon, where we have a land use system that strictly regulates how people get permits and what is allowed. You can't have the kind of political interference that happens in Chicago or some other cities. So I don't know, that's another academic study you guys are relying on, and I don't know why you rely on all these research projects to construct your proposal.
What, sorry, Paul, just,
I'm sorry,
I want to clarify the study.
You
Back
rely on
up.
evidence.
Can you tell me what this study was based on, what cities? I've heard this floating around and I briefly touched on it, but I'm still not clear as to where they got that. Where did they aggregate their data from?
We sent a link to you all. I honestly can't tell you off the top of my head what cities they compared it to. It was multiple jurisdictions who had moved from at-large to single-member districts. So it wasn't just one city. It was looking at a variety of different places in which that would happen. And I do want to go back to the permitting. I don't disagree with you, right, in terms of permitting being a huge problem. Moving to a city administrator with an executive mayor will help solve that problem. It'll streamline our permitting system. Like right now, if you're a homeowner and want to like put in a bathroom, right, you got to go to 3 different bureaus, potentially 3 different commissioners, get 3 different answers. And so the component of this measure that moves to a city administrator and executive mayor will help solve that problem.
Is the Baltimore experience at all relevant?
Oh gosh. Can I just say, I mean,
we don't
Baltimore,
have to talk about it if it's not.
I'm happy to talk about it because it's literally, it's not an apples to apples comparison. It's like comparing an apple to a bowl of soup, right? Baltimore did not have what we're proposing. They had multi-member districts without proportional representation. So they were electing the same kind of folks they were electing before. Nobody felt represented. I will say also that since moving to single-member districts, in 2021, the University of Illinois Chicago did a study. Baltimore is the second most corrupt city in the US based on federal indictments. I don't think they're anything that we want to compare ourselves to.
And so you're implying how we vote is going to solve all of the problems, because the Baltimore example is exact structure that is in this
No,
charter.
it's not.
true.
100% not true.
The mayor works with the city manager, is separate from the council. There's a council. There was 4 districts. They had 4 representations.
They were elected
versus
by first past the post.
Okay,
They were not
so
elected
the
by
election, so
proportional
you're
ranked
saying the
voting.
only difference with Baltimore is how they're elected.
I'm saying it is a huge
They had
distinction
multi-member
between.
districts.
They had
but you're
multi-member
proposing They
districts
just didn't
that
have
count.
proportional representation.
That's exactly
Or
right.
ranked vote, or ranked choice.
Right, so the nature of the candidates and the nature of the electeds didn't have the opportunity. Folks who hadn't had a voice did not have a chance to elect a candidate of their choice in the Baltimore model. So of course they were unhappy with the outcome.
But it was the same governance structure. What was different in the governance structure? What you're doing is assuming that the voting process was different, yeah.
The
What
voting
I'm-
process impacts who serves and represents.
You supported the
I mean,
governance structure change, though. Your side said that you support a strong mayor and you support a legislative council, and now you're opposing it. I don't understand.
No, I'm saying I'm opposed to multi-member districts.
Right, but what you're criticizing in Baltimore is the mayor-council structure.
No, what I'm criticizing is that they had multi-member districts and they got rid of it in 2002 because it was so corrupt and they went to single-member districts. That's the point. That's why we're referring to Baltimore. And you guys are saying it's completely different because of the voting structure.
Yes.
That's separate. I'm talking about the government structure.
That's why the measures that we
government
have in the
structure.
ballot, that's exactly the argument about why they need to be bundled together, because they are interrelated.
So you
The
guys-
I think we're going to wrap it up.
Okay.
We're sort of now. Thank you guys for coming in. Let's end with just 1 minute. Please try to keep it to 1 minute from the yes and no campaigns about why you think the measure should or should not pass. We'll start with the no campaign.
I've given you the idea that the ballot measure, talking about the ballot measure instead of arguing about the particulars of the ballot measure, that is a problem, that it's all in one. And it removes voices by not having to be able to make choices. So the other part of it is there is not enough in the ballot measure that addresses the issue of functionality, efficiency of government. It is there. This establishment of a city manager lays the foundation for that, but there needs to be some more filling in as to what that really means.
And I would just add, I think the proposed single transferable vote is going to reduce confidence in government. In your scenarios, I think you should use the Wizard of Oz characters, because this really relies on the person behind the green curtain pulling the levers in the right way for this system to work. And we have 3 different definitions of how you win. It's less than 25%, it's 25%, and it's 33%. It's all over the board, and I just think it's too unpredictable for Portland.
Becca?
I guess I'll first start with a personal reflection. So having had the honor of being a member of the Charter Commission for the past 21 months really helped me fall back in love with my city. I mean, the fact that we had these deep conversations with thousands of Portlanders that helped inform this measure that voters will get a chance, it is, for me, it's been the experience of a lifetime. And what resulted in that is a measure that was built for and by the people, that was meticulously researched, that meets our unique needs here in Portland, that will absolutely lead to a more functional, more efficient, more effective, more representative form of government, give Portlanders more voice and more choice, and ensure that we have a fully functioning city.
Are you at all surprised at the pushback?
I mean, there's always pushback, right? I mean, I've run no campaigns like the.
No, that's what I'm asking. Are you surprised?
I'm not surprised by the pushback because reasonable people can disagree. I'm not surprised by the fact that the no side has not a single organization who has joined the no side, whereas the yes side has over 50, including the ACLU, Portland Association of Teachers, and the Food Bank. None of that surprises me.
Okay. Thanks everyone for coming in. We really appreciate you taking your time. You're probably tired of seeing each other.
Nice to meet in person.
It is.
Thank